Hello. So we need the mixer on. It's not on. The event is cancelled. This was a kids' TV program. This is the theme tune. So you've just switched on your TV set. This is the Andy Votel soundtrack show. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for coming. Are there any Don Cherry fans in the room? Don't be shy. One? Let's pretend that we're two? Mild fans? Fair weather fans? You can. It's Neneh Cherry's stepdad, yeah. Any Neneh Cherry fans? Yes. Look at that. Wow. Don Cherry had. It's not a good week for Don Cherry. I mean, Don Cherry's been dead for quite a while, but his friend died yesterday, Dollar Brand, which was sad. And then a few weeks ago, a guy called Beshi Berger passed away. The reason why I played that song is the mystery will unfold in the next hour and a half. But as a dedication to Beshi Berger, and that track's called Moving Pictures for the Ear, which is a good title, right? What a great title for a piece of music. It talks about Beshi Berger on the sleeve notes here. And reading sleeve notes and liner notes I really advise that you should do that. It's amazing how many people don't do that. Somebody said earlier, can you speak Romanian? And I just went, dude, I'm English, we're monolingual. He said, can you speak German? I said, no, but I can read the back of records in any country. You know, I can find the word synthesizer, I can find the word la batterie, I can find what I need on the back of records. And it says about Beshi Berger here, Beshi Berger has appeared many times with Don Cherry, making school tours, recording with him, and for the soundtrack of a recent film called The Magic Mountain. And that little piece of information there drove me absolutely crazy for years. And that was Moving Pictures for the Ear by Don Cherry. Okay, let's start the discussion. Let's start now. We'll talk about that more in a bit. Who likes music? Have you always liked music? I didn't really like music when I was a kid. I didn't like music at all. I found music to be really distracting, and living in a white middle-class area in England, pretty disappointing. But then when you're a kid, I guess, you know, I hated music, I hated girls, I hated spicy food, all these things that confuse you, you know, it's just like, they're confusing, they're just there to confuse you. And you know, like if like the Muppet Show was on, or Banana Splits, you know, they'd do a musical number, and I was really disappointed because what I wanted was the boing, bing, boing, bing, all the noises, the crashes, the cars, the fights, the fun. And when the music came on, it was just like, no, not music. Why do we need music? Music always ruins everything. But there was this destructive nature in me which really enjoyed noise, you know, sound. and I don't know if anybody here grew up in the 60s or the 70s, but these things, this here, don't ever touch that. When I was a kid, if you did that, your parents are going to send you to prison. Don't ever touch this. This was like setting off a nuclear bomb when I was a kid. Do not touch that thing there. But it sounds kind of all right, you know. And when you learn to play it backwards, you know, when you put like, you know, Star Wars figures, you know, you put Star Wars figures on there and you spin it up and then you kill them, and, you know, it's all kind of a lot of fun. And, you know, you play one backwards and the music's going backwards. It was great, you know. So there was sound there. And lo and behold, if you touch this surface like that, well, that's it. You're going to get kicked out of the house, dude. Don't ever do this. Who would ever do that? It's crazy, right? Don't ever do that. Then compact cassettes came in, and these things went in the attic. You could do whatever you want with them then. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about these things. These just go in the tip. These go into, like, skips, and you can find this shit anywhere, you know, for years. Through the 70s and 80s, this was cheap. The cheapest form of entertainment. And all that business, you know, and the idea of making crazy noises with records was super interesting to me. And then you start to see this on TV, and people like Run DMC come about, and the Fat Boys and everyone, and Public Enemy, and everybody's doing this with the records, and you're like, wow, I can identify it. This is music, you know, we can all make music. I used to say to my dad, like, oh, one day I'd like to be a film star or a pop star. And he goes, well, you have to learn. I'd like to draw record sleeves. He goes, well, you have to learn. But you didn't have to learn with this. You just do what you want. You can do whatever you want. You can make as much noise as possible. So there was a time when I was a kid where my dad bought me like a train set, you know, like a Hornby train set. I had no interest in trains. You know, a train set, you have a power regulator where you can make it go faster or slower. So I got a couple of these old turntables and I rigged them up to this power regulator, and you could make them go slower and faster. And then if you bought a cheap mixer or some sort of like lever or something to go in between, you can start DJing, and that's how I started DJing. So, and it all clashed with the discovery of, and lo and behold, it seems at that point I probably started liking music a bit. But then it was the idea of, is there enough passion in love songs? Is there enough passion in, you know, all these sort of white middle-class problems that we deal with every day? Is there a reason for us to, you know, pop music seems so thin to me. And I started looking towards cinema and basically, you know, and listening to and enjoying the music that you found in films as a concern. Who knew, you know, when your favourite programme came on the TV week after week, you'd get excited by the soundtracks. And I suppose this is why we're going to be here talking about soundtracks. I, as Eleanor explained, I run a label called Finders Keepers. Before that, I ran a label called Twisted Nerve. So I'll tell you a bit about this. And on Finders Keepers, we've released hundreds of records, 300 records. Twisted Nerve maybe released 150 records, and we've released records from Turkey and Greece and Iran and Brazil and all over the place, but a small section of it is soundtracks. Well, in fact, quite a sizable section is soundtracks. So we don't have to sit here for 6 days. We can sit here for a couple of hours maybe and talk about soundtrack music. So are there any hip-hop fans here? Was hip-hop anyone's first musical love? Seems like a generational thing, but it was for me. I used to, my dad was really encouraging with teaching me about how to make things and break things and put things together. He taught me how to make tape loops as well, which was an incredible thing where you'd crack open a cassette and you'd snip the tape into a loop, and you could make loops of noise go round and round infinitely forever. and all these crazy tools were possibly a way to make as much crazy noise as possible. So it was quite nice of him to do that for me. He was very supportive in that sense. My mum and dad never lived together. I used to go and play pool on a Sunday night with him, and we'd go and watch films like, I don't know, I distinctly remember watching the Goodfellas, you know, the Scorsese film, and we'd go in the cinema and watch it at like midday, and then we'd hide in the toilets and watch it again, and then hide in the toilets and watch it again. I remember watching Goodfellas 3 days with my dad on a Sunday in one row, and it was obsessive with all this crazy music and imagery. And I was too young to be watching this violent film, so we had to hide in the toilets to do this. But we'd every Sunday we go and do this. And then one Sunday, I said to my dad, I don't want to go to the cinema. And he goes, why not? I said, well, I like to listen to this rap show on a Sunday afternoon. And my favourite rap group at the time was Gang Starr. Is anyone fans with Gang Starr? Yeah. So Premier and Guru. I said, I don't want to go to the cinema. I want to sit and listen to them on the radio. And he goes, well, why don't we just go to the radio? And I just went, that's a crazy idea. You can't just go to the radio. And he said, we can go to the radio. So we went to the radio. My dad spoke to the security guard, spoke to the DJ on the radio, and says, is it all right if my son comes up and sits in on the radio? So 5 minutes later, I'm sitting with DJ Premier and Guru, and I'm only 15 years old. I've never drunk a beer, never smoked a joint, never had sex. I was a white kid rapper, and I just started rapping to Guru and Premier like a maniac. 2 years later, I would never have the confidence to do something. They were my heroes, you know, but I did it because when you're a kid, you just do these crazy things. And from that point, I sat there speaking to Premier, who was almost shyer than me. I mean, he's larger than life now, but they were young, you know. And he started telling me about sampling records, like maybe you should sample, not really always look. I used to always buy records with like black guys with an afro. That'll do it. That'll be good. There'll be a drum beat on that. If it's got a black guy and an afro, we're in. It's going to be great. He said, why don't you start looking for more dramatic records? And why don't you stop looking for the beats at the start and look for the beats in the middle and maybe on the fade and all these ways? And I just had this tiny little masterclass when I was 15 years old with Premier from Gang Starr. Now, for people that know who Gang Starr are, that's pretty impressive, right? It's pretty crazy. But I vowed that day that I was never going to get a proper job. So, you know. And the guy at the radio said, if you want to come back next week and answer the phones, you can come and answer the phones. You ain't going to get paid, but you can come and answer the phones. And that was quite remarkable for me. So I started making my own records and making my own beats and sampling. Instead of sampling funk, I started sampling soundtracks and sampling things off the TV. And so maybe I should play you some of those early records that I made. Was that all right with you? You know? And we'll talk about... okay, so one thing that's quite important, I'm going to talk about a college trip. So I went to college about when I was like 17, and we went on a trip to Berlin and Poland, and I discovered the music of... My mum and dad had given me some money to buy food, and I just thought, well, when I get there, I'm just going to buy records. All I'm going to do is buy records. I'll go to Poland, and I'll buy some Donald Byrd records, I'll buy some James Brown records, I'll buy some Grant Green records, and I'll buy all these jazz records. You get to Poland, there's no American records there. It's just like records from Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania. There's like Eastern European records, but the thing is, I was a graphic design student, so I was there so I just bought them for the covers. And one guy that I really fell in love with was Krzysztof Komeda, and he was basically Roman Polanski's main composer. And this record was a holy grail for me. It actually came out in England, but having got this taste for Polish culture, Polish poster design, Polish theatre, Polish music, Polish jazz, this was like my holy grail. So this was one thing. So before I play my own stuff, I'll probably just play you this. But the main thing about this, though, it's basically the collaboration between three people, Roman Polanski, Krzysztof Komeda, and the graphic designer poster designer Jan Lenitsa. And this taught me, it's amazing because it's actually got 3 figures on the front. So pictorially, it just showed that the power of community, which was something, and the whole sort of DIY sort of logic of having a small crew together and being able to support each other, again, in a maligned situation. And, you can do this yourself. If these 3 guys from Poland can make this film and, it be an absolute classic of world cinema and communicate with someone with me, well, if I just get 3 friends together, maybe we can do the same. So it was really inspiring for me. But so I'll play you this piece of music just so we can have a little sort of musical soundtrack to an ear to what sort of I was listening to at the time. Hey, so we might as well keep the mic up. So as a result of a trip to Poland with art college, when everybody else was listening to Oasis, that's what I was listening to. So, so like I said, I'm going to play you some things that the first records I ever made. So this was in 1995. The first time I'd ever had anything on vinyl. Was a remix for a guy called Mr. Scruff. I don't know if you know who Mr. Scruff is. I'm glad that some of you are nodding. He's from the same town as me. His DJ name was Funky Scruff. That's what he was called. He was called the Funky Scruff. And he used to work at Quick Save, which is a local sort of discount supermarket in the UK. And he had crazy records. And he asked me to remix one of his tracks. And it was 1995. And I was really up to staying up late watching horror films like Witchfinder General, Sitting Target, Blood on Satan's Claw, and The Wicker Man. And are people familiar with The Wicker Man film? So this is what an 18 or 19-year-old me did with The Wicker Man. So that's me, sort of like in a home studio with a couple of turntables, and a good friend of mine called Rick Myers, and a video cassette recorder, and we're taping stuff off late night TV, and it's got a sample. The drums are from Love, the band Love. There's a Led Zeppelin sample in there. There's there's like a, I don't know, it's like sample clearance nightmare, basically. It's just like, it just samples like too much famous music for an independent record, so like you possibly go to prison 3 times if you release that record. This is a similar thing that I did the following year, and this samples the film Blood on Satan's Claw. So I'm just playing you this to show that burgeoning interest in soundtrack music that I had early on. So. Yeah. That samples Can as well, so imagine that legal lawsuit. Can from, are any Can fans here? That's good. That's a Malcolm Mooney tune called She Brings the Rain. Malcolm became a really good friend and collaborator with me later on in life. Can, without a shadow of a doubt, one of my favourite of a band, probably my favourite band. And so are Goblin. And these are both, and Can were soundtrack makers. So, you know, Can were only here to make soundtracks. Can started off as a soundtrack band. So all the hits, Spoon, all the big records, originally soundtracks. I'll play you one last tune by me. And I don't know, I'll let you guess if you can. I mean, again, I was like 18, 19 when I did this, but I'll see if you can guess where the sample comes from. Anyone know where that music was stolen from? No? It's Twin Peaks, so it was Fire Walk With Me, and then the guitar bits from Dorothy Ashby. Any Dorothy Ashby fans? There weren't many Dorothy Ashby fans in 1995. but yeah. So at this point, I'm just like trying to find things off the TV, taping stuff off the TV, blah, 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 and then, going to the ends of earth to try and find original soundtracks and becoming a bit of a scavenger and basically just going to video shops and going to like film merchandise fairs and stuff and looking for soundtracks. There used to be, before eBay or the internet, there used to be an ads paper called Loot in the UK. Is there anybody from the UK here? Yeah? You remember Loot? Yeah. So Loot was like a jumble sale, right? It was like a newspaper, like somebody selling old tires, or someone selling some, like, you know, some copper wire, or someone selling loads of shit that people didn't want. It was for sale in Loot, and something that people didn't want was records, like vastly, you know. And once I looked in Loot, and this guy said, I'm selling Italian soundtracks, and I was just like, cool. Italian soundtracks, £1 each. I was like, cool. And there was only one guy. I'd only ever heard of Ennio Morricone. I hadn't heard of anything else, you know. He bought this box of records round. This guy, knock at the door, £1 each. Open the door, it's a pilot. The guy was dressed as a pilot. He was a pilot, came to my door with a big box of records. And I was like, all right. So he comes in, and this dude was flying to Rome and Milan, like, every day, back to Manchester, and they'd give him some per diems to buy some food, and he always had 2, like, small amount of lira. And weirdly, if you cast your mind back, at the newsagents in the airport, if you can imagine this, they were selling records. So he'd buy these cheap records. And he came with this box, a massive box of records. And I don't know if anybody here is a fan of Italian giallo films, but some of these soundtracks are, like, insanely priced. And I remember looking in that box, and there was things like Death Laid an Egg, $5 for an August Moon. Some of these records are now worth £700, £1,000. And I was just like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. I don't want that. That's weird. That's scary. I don't want that. And then I saw this one, which was the films of Dario Argento, and which was mostly Ennio Morricone. So this was a safe bet. But it also had this band called Goblin, which sounded a bit stupid. So I thought, well, I'm going to buy this. I'm going to buy that. And then I heard Goblin for the first time, but I also heard this track, which kind of blew my mind. I mean, I'd never heard music like this before. And, all right, we all know Ennio Morricone, right? I mean, my mum is a huge Ennio Morricone fan. You know, she doesn't know about the slasher films, but she knows about The Mission and Shima or whatever, you know, this Ennio Morricone from Cinema Paradiso. But she didn't know things, she will never know that things like this exist. Do you like that? That's the Ennio Morricone we didn't know about. Again, when everybody else was listening to the Stone Roses and Oasis, I was listening to that kind of music. And so was a good friend of mine called Stan Chow, who's quite a famous illustrator now. and we set up a night in Manchester at a venue called the Night and Day Cafe, and we called it Il Gatto, which was named after this Dario Argento film with a amazing score by Ennio Morricone. And Il Gatto was a soundtrack night, so who knew, like, when, you know, people were still, you know, the Hacienda was still open, and people were still going to, you know, and people were still walking around, roaming the streets with Joy Division T-shirts and bucket hats on, you know. It's just like there was an Ennio Morricone or an Italian soundtrack night in Manchester. I'd been putting out records with this label called Grand Central, and luckily I had also become the graphic designer for Grand Central, and I did probably my first 20 record sleeves. At that point, I was doing production for a small independent record label in Manchester, pretty much insisting that if you release my records, I have to design my own record sleeves. It was in the days before computers. We know everything was made with knives and photography and glue and Tipp-Ex and nails, and I still work that way now. So that was something that was really important to me. But I also learned how to make and manufacture records in the process. They were paying me to learn to set up a rival record label, basically, which was fine. And I remain very good friends with all those people. And they were releasing the records that I just played for you. But I also persuaded them that they should maybe start looking into the idea of reissuing old music, because nobody was really doing it, you know. I mean, there was some seminal releases that came out in the 90s. That, you know, I guess, I don't know if there's any fans of Jess Franco in here, but the reissue of his soundtracks, or the music that made his soundtracks, known as Vampiros Lesbos, was open the world up to this crazy new sort of kitschy, psychedelic, European, you know, form of exploitation cinema, which was a bottomless well if people only knew it. So Fat City started doing these compilations called Mystic Brew, and one of the records that I got from the pilot that came to my house was an Italian, Spanish, heroin, smacksploitation zombie film. It could have been called anything. They could have picked any city. They could have picked Milan. They could have picked Turin. They could have picked Barcelona. They could have picked Bucharest. But they called it The Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue. And these colours, these brown and orange colours, are the same colours as the independent bus company of the 70s and 80s in Manchester, which is insane. The Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue, well, who wants to hear it? Yeah? Who's heard it before? No? No? All right, let's listen to The Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue. There's a negligible danceability to that record, I think, which the good people at Fat City and Grand Central, Mark Ray and Dave Walker, agreed that if I could contact the person who made this music and clear the rights, well, they would put it on Mystic Brew, which was this compilation. So I just thought, well, I'll contact the film director. And it was a guy called Georges Grau. Now, you should probably contact the production company, or you should probably contact the composer. But, you know, as you know, if you understand the politics around things like electrochord or polskie nagranie, or on a whole global scale, you know, try to license music from pre-revolution Iran is a kind of like a weird spectrum. So you never quite know where the rights to things are. But this was something I was going to learn in the next decade, like, you know, on the front line. And Georges Grau, this director, who probably even couldn't even remember this, just said on the phone, yeah, it's fine, just go for it, you know. Maybe. I mean, I couldn't speak Italian. but you know, but it sounded like a yes. So that proved itself to be a potential avenue for me. What I really wanted to do, I'd set up this label called Twisted Nerve, again, which was named after an obscure soundtrack to a Hewell Bennett and Hayley Mills film. Has anybody seen the film Twisted Nerve? I can't whistle. Do it. You can't whistle. Can anyone whistle? It goes. So who can whistle and knows that? This relatively unknown film director called Quentin Tarantino made that quite famous after we'd set up the label Twisted Nerve. Has anybody heard of Badly Drawn Boy? Few. Badly Drawn Boy was the big act on Twisted Nerve, and it opened loads of doors for me. I was producing his music from that point onwards, and again with a big emphasis on film soundtracks. He was hugely, you know, unfortunately today I have to say names like Roman Polanski and Woody Allen because I can't retrace the past. I can't erase the past, but we were hugely influenced by those two guys. We were also influenced by the films of Milos Forman. I was really enjoying a deep dive into the Czech New Wave, which is something which has remained my number one passion through life. There were two books that I got from a Manchester library sale. One was Films of a Subversive Art by Amos Vogel. I don't know if anybody knows that film. It's an absolutely essential book. And the other film's called All the Beautiful Young Men and Women by Josef Savesky, I think he's called. And that is about the end of the Czech New Wave. And all these films have pictures in for films that you might never see, probably never see. Before the advent of the internet and Blu-ray and, you know, in the annals of European VHS distribution, you might be able to catch these films like once every 2 years or something, but, you know, it was a fervent place to look for film. I also was producing music for Jane Weaver. I don't know if anybody knows her. That's my wife, and she made an album called The Silver Globe, which was named after a film by Andrzej Żuławski from Poland. And Griff Reese from Super Furry Animals is someone that I've produced a lot of music for. We had a project recording love songs from the perspective of a shark trying to kill a girl on the beach. And it was that sort of alternative songwriting and sampling thing that sort of earned me a reputation that led to me producing people like Travis Scott and various other, a mixture between a whole spectrum between, you know, rock music, trip hop, hip hop, which was my original love, and then via Twisted Nerve, he, being Damon, was asked to do a soundtrack to a film by working title called About a Boy. Does anybody know that film? Yeah, okay. I can't wholeheartedly recommend that film. I can't wholeheartedly recommend any Hugh Grant film. I can't wholeheartedly recommend the Bridget Jones Diaries. But it opened a huge door for me after that point. And what I'd always really wanted to do was release unreleased soundtracks and release obscure, rare records, because as a producer, you can build a sample library up which just goes on forever and ever and ever. I mean, we went shopping today at Music Bazaar. How do you say this? Yeah? Is it called Music Bazaar? You know, the record shop? Highly recommended record shop round the corner. And, you know, I'm diving through records and you're getting annoyed with me and I'm just going through, the pile's getting bigger and bigger. And it's just like, you know, there's part of my head which, this is just a sample library. It's just like, but people go, have you heard that Romanian album? And I'll just go, oh, that's a brilliant album. It's the best album out of Romania ever. And they're just like, I listened to the whole album. There's nothing on there. I said, oh yeah, there's only one track. And that's always been a problem with DJs and collectors. It's like, oh, yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned the whole album's not great. It's only one track. But then sometimes it's like, it's only half a track that's good. Or maybe it's only just the intro on one track that just so happened to be sampled by somebody. So you get a bit of a skewed thing. But if you build a sample library of all this amazing music, you're never going to have time to use them. And then you just start respecting the music in its own right. And then think, well, maybe somebody else will sample this, or maybe somebody else will enjoy this, or maybe somebody else will start thinking like I think. And Fat City, one of the last things I did for them was a compilation with a title which was based on an old rap demo that me and my friend Mark Rathbone, a.k.a. Boney Votel, put together. And we called the compilation Finders Keepers. And it was probably one of the best moves I ever made because it was just the right time for this thing to hit, you know. So we did this compilation called Finders Keepers. Twisted Nerve was trundling on. It was a massive money pit. Badly Drawn Boy was doing all right, though. And then I just said, right, now I've got the sort of passport and the kudos and, you know, the genuine belief that we can do the best thing for an obscure artist. And we set up a label, a dedicated label to introducing people to, you know, old European, Turkish, South American, Iranian, African, you know, music which just had noises on, noises that you wouldn't ever hear anywhere else, which you certainly wouldn't hear in, you know, dance music or formulaic rock music. I mean, it has to be mentioned that in this climate where we made these Morricone-themed events, there were bands like Doves, who were our best friends, and Sub, and bands like Elbow, and, you know, quite famous UK bands that were all sort of vibing off the same thing. So in Manchester, there was such a wealth of crazy music, albeit white male music, but there was a lot of music there. And there was a lot to rebel against, and there was a lot to explore. There was a lot of reasons to explore other types of music and bring them back to the hub in Manchester for people to sort of hope that people would be influenced by them as well. So there was a lot to share. The irony in the name Finders Keepers is we shared, you know, we were a sharing label. We didn't keep onto it. We liberated music, really. So that was the idea. But I don't know if you're familiar with the phrase, the poetic phrase, finders, keepers, losers, weepers. I hope you are. So the title isn't nullified by its island. Right, okay then. Believe it or not, I've written some notes here. Okay, so that's how we got to Finders Keepers. Do you want me to play you lots of Finders Keepers records and I'll talk about the huge nuances between all of them? We've done 300 releases, so how long have you got? Okay, I've categorized them. Is this working? Is this all right? Yeah? Is it making sense? Okay, then. Are there any Bollywood fans here? Bollywood was such an amazing thing, like, for a DJ, because in England, people are kind of shy when you put unusual music in front of them. And I always think everything that I've ever loved either starts with confusion or a dislike or a cringe. You know, it makes something that makes you cringe. And when I first heard Turkish music, like people like Selda, I was like, whoa, that doesn't sound right. That sounds like odd. And I need to hear it again. I need to hear it again. I need to hear it again. And then your heart just starts growing and you fall in love. And it's just like, this is what our folks' generation, English people, our mums and dads in the 60s, they might have one French record by Edith Piaf, or they might have a Brazilian record, and that's as far as they go. But nobody wants a German accent on a record. Nobody wants a Turkish accent on a record, and a lot has to change. And I think, I've got 2 kids now who are both 20, and they've grown up around that. And I think our generation are very accustomed to listening to Welsh language music, as they would be to listen to Romanian language music or Polish language music. But it took a long time to do that. The big cringe in the 80s was the afros and the flares, and people would, the start of Rare Groove when I started DJing always started with 2 girls would get on the dance floor and start taking the piss and messing around and going, this music's really silly. And then people would gravitate towards them, blokes, and go, oh, I'm getting a piece of this. And then everyone starts acting a bit silly. And then you've got a great party. And that went on for like 10, 15 years. Bollywood was the same, because it's just like the terrible cultural appropriation which would hit the dance floor opened up to people like, well, if you're going to start mimicking like Bollywood films, or, you can imagine the stereotypical dance that someone would do, you're safe with Greek, you're safe with, after this I can probably play a Turkish record, I can play a Latin record, I can play this, because basically they don't realise that they've just signed up for the party, But they were at first the fear made them scared, and they were mimicking it, and this is how the fun starts. And I genuinely think, that cringe is when you first feel that cringe, but you need to hear it again and need to hear it again. You need closure, right? And that starts everything, and that's pretty much how, like I said, when I first heard music as a kid, I was like, that's awkward. I don't need that. It's like, and I think that's how, the love-hate idiom is stuck in the English language. People always say hate is a strong word, but I don't think it's strong enough. I think there's like a million different words between hate and love. Like every style of music, there's different feelings you should have. You can really only feel one feeling for a premeditated, coordinated, contrived love song. But, if you take a film about a slasher or being stuck on an island, or a film about cheese, or or a film about a woman that likes to get dressed up as a cat, or an Exorcist ripoff, there's all these amazing emotions with music, So, anyway, I forgot what I was talking about. But Bollywood, wow. Now then, okay, so I'm going to play some Bollywood, and then I will talk about Finders Keepers' reaction to Bollywood, if that's okay with you. Any questions at this point? This is the kind of Bollywood record which I would be an amazing DJ tune, amazing DJ tool.
36, 24, 36, nothing less, nothing more.
It's a film about yoga.
लेकिन ये कैसे होगा?
Y, O, G, A.
Now, I'm not going to play the whole record, but has anybody spotted anything suspicious about that record? What? Yeah, it's a rip-off of The Model by Kraftwerk, isn't it? Yeah. Now, Bollywood did this a lot. They didn't do it 10 times, they didn't do it 100 times, they did it thousands of times. And there's amazing Bollywood music which is absolutely genuine in its creation. R.D. Burman will always be a superhero of mine. Someone like Bappi Lahiri, he's got less of a conscience and quite likes to rip off other people's music, which is great. The problem is a lot of it's owned by Sony, which is Universal. So the idea of doing Bollywood compilations was already quite difficult. Bollywood is named because it's from Bombay, the former Mumbai, as you know. That's what the Bollywood idiom comes from. But there was a much smaller film industry in Pakistan from Lahore. What do you think that was called? Bollywood, Bombay, Lahore makes... Come on, dude. Lollywood, all right. So the Lollywood film industry, where the industry in Bollywood would have 60-piece orchestras and choirs and lawyers, which could easily get you out of the trouble of sampling, ripping off Kraftwerk or Michael Jackson or virtually anything. The Lollywood industry would usually just be 5 or 6 guys in a room, you know, and that's great. The Lollywood film industry had these scary letters on every record, EMI, and that was something that we never wanted to mess with until we realised, right, that it wasn't EMI. It was a construction company that called itself EMI, which is crazy, right? So we had a contact for a friend of ours called Chris Menist, and he was working out there. And we managed to do these compilations called The Sound of Wonder. Now then, I will, if you give me a minute, who wants to listen to some Lollywood music? Yeah, I do. This is the problem with vinyl. Everyone loves vinyl. We did a compilation called The Sound of Wonder. So they didn't have a massive choir. They didn't have a massive budget. They had a small band, maybe one synthesizer. And one of the leading guys, well, there's a band called the Taffo Brothers, and there's one guy called M. Ashraf, which were our main focus points. One of the queen of Bollywood is called Noor Jahan, and the princess of Bollywood is a singer called Nahid Akhtar, who only sang for 10 years. So it's easy to remember, right? There's like, if you were collecting figures, you could build the cast, you know the names, you know. It's like knowing every member of Public Enemy. It's easier to remember than the players in a football team, so it's achievable, you know, it's achievable to be a fanatic. So the small band, and then they had just like one kind of not very good synthesizer. So.
What's today, what will be tomorrow? Don't think, sing with me, die with me, humanity link. Damodam mast qalandar, saqi shahbaz qalandar. This is the song of wonder. What's today, what will be tomorrow? Don't think, sing with me, die with me, humanity link. Damodam mast qalandar, saqi shahbaz qalandar. This is the song of wonder. Song of wonder, song of wonder.
Now, I'd never heard anything like that in my life. What do you think of that? Do you like that? You have a question?
This is a compilation made by you guys.
Yeah.
Did you alter the tracks? Did you master them in any way, or just the way they came on vinyl, you just reproduced them?
You wouldn't expect a construction company to have like 1,000 master tapes, would you? They did. They did? Yeah, they did, yeah. They didn't know what to do with them. Yeah, we were the first person that was ever interested in them. So it was crazy. It was like, you know, you don't ask, you don't get, you know. I mean, it seems like a big task, like, you know, trying to get in touch with Pakistani construction company to talk about music because you want to do a compilation. But, you know, I mean, I've got friends who can't be bothered going to the pub on a Thursday night, or if I go and see a band, you know, in Manchester, and they're going all the way to Manchester. I've been to Australia to watch a band. So it's like, come on, you know, people just try. If you care, you know, you're putting stuff into the world, you know. You're building massive cultural bridges that no politician could ever do, you know. It's just like, you know, you're beating food. You know, it's like you're beating the alcohol industry by feeding music into people's ears. And one thing about that, which you'll notice, which was crazy, which took me a minute to work out, Lollywood records are like 7 minutes long. Yeah, they don't do albums, so everything's split onto 3 7-inch EPs because it's too long. So if you want to buy a Pakistani soundtrack, you have to buy the 3 EPs, and they're rare. They're hard to get now, you know. And the reason being is because you might have noticed that was English and either Urdu or Punjabi. And sometimes they fit all 3 languages. So they sing it in each language on the same record, which goes on forever. So it's good job the music's cool. So, you know, so that's a quirk that I've never heard in any other form of music. But that's Lollywood. If you go to Chennai, the Tamil film industry is from a place called Kodambakkam, a place that I always struggle to remember. And that's the Kollywood film industry, the Tamil film industry. Bollywood's got 60-piece orchestra. Lollywood's got 5 guys in a room with a dodgy synthesizer. Kollywood's usually just one dude. It's one guy with a DX7, maybe a drum machine, and sampling old strings off old records. And that guy's usually called Ilayaraja. And Ilayaraja sounds like this. What do you think of that? Yeah? It's good, right? That singer that's Ilya Raja. The singer will either be S. Janaki or K. S. Chitra. Weirdly, everyone's name is like just a letter. M. Ashraf, I don't know what that guy's called. M. Ashraf, S. Janaki, K. S. Chitra. It's weird. I don't know what that... Somebody in the audience might be able to tell me, or somebody might be able to tell me one day why they do that. But, yeah. Ilya Raja, he kind of keeps himself busy. He's only made about 6,000 soundtracks. So he probably needs to get a move on. But, yeah, and that's an amazing character. So... as I've said before, Finders Keepers, you know, we don't only do film music, but this is great because it's film music and it also scratched that Eastern itch that we had as well. So it was a beautiful thing. Okay, one of the first things that I really wanted to do when we'd had success at Finders Keepers, which was what was great with Finders Keepers, Twisted Nerve was just a money pit. We just ended up putting so much money into the label. You know, an artist needs a poster on the street that week. A new contemporary artist from Manchester needs to make the chart, or they need to make like this month's BBC radio plugger list or whatever. Everything on Finders Keepers was already 30 years out of date, so there's no rush, which is an amazing thing, which doesn't exist in the music industry, because the music industry rushes you. It rushes everything. My wife is a singer called Jane Weaver. It'd be great if you checked out her music. She makes beautiful, beautiful records, and she's luckily quite successful with them. But everything's a rush. She has to get them out, and within a month or 2 months, it's over. It's ended. Finders Keepers, we wanted the label to last 20 years, and it lasted 20 years, and we achieved a lot in what we did. But until the 19th year, we were still selling copies of our first Jean-Claude Vanier record, who was the composer who did the arrangements for music by Serge Gainsbourg. And he's the patron saint of the label. He's a very good friend. He's a hero of mine. And we've been able to enjoy this long, romantic, creative relationship together for 20 years for a record which is 50 years old. So, I mean, you know, why rush it? Why ruin it for ourselves? Every piece of music that you're force-fed on the radio has been part of a marketing plan. And you're the victim. You're the guinea pig. You know, we have to find our own music because it's all been engineered and worked out on an abacus or a calculator, what you're going to like, what time of the day you're going to listen to it, you know, where you're going to buy it from. You know, you don't even get anything anymore. MP3s, there's not such thing as a second-hand MP3, is there? You know, it's just like, you know, it's just... Yeah, so should we talk about Czech cinema? Because that's, I mean, there's, how long have we got left? 1 hour. 1 hour? Right, okay. So I could just do a big DJ set, right? Yeah? Okay. Czech cinema. Are there any fans of Czech cinema here? Yeah. Films like Valerie and Her Week of Wonders, that's an incredible film. That was, you know... Daisies, The Cremator, The Cassandra Cat, Saxana, Morgiana. They're incredible, incredible films, usually made by a movement of 6 people that came from the FAMU Film Institute in Prague, with the exception of one other guy who was a Slovakian-born director. And they made films at Barrandov Studios in Prague. 2 of my favourite composers from that whole scene was a guy called Zdeněk Liška and another guy called Lubos Fischer. So I'll play you a piece of music, the soundtrack to Valerie and Her Week of Wonders. One thing that is beautiful in Czech cinema is there's often a motif or a noise. And if I go back to when I was a kid, I was only really interested with the noise. I've got like a problem with patience anyway. So it's just like if a piece of music is 1 minute long, like a Napalm Death record, well, I'm quite happy. This track is a beautiful track. Did you like that? It's a good track, yeah? Needs to get played on the radio more, I think. you know, I mean, we all deal with idents and phone tones and rings, and that is, you know, that will always be Valerie and a Week of Wonders to me. They're magical earrings, so I will never, ever not know what that noise is, you know. But it's not the only Czech soundtrack which has a beautiful pictorial ident. So, Valerie and a Week of Wonders was a film about a teenage witch when I first discovered it when I was like 17, 18. I was closer in age to the leading protagonist in the film. Because I did so much detective work about Valerie and a Week of Wonders, mainly to find the music, I became something of an authority on Valerie and a Week of Wonders. And I still travel to introduce the film Valerie and a Week of Wonders, which is a film about the hallucinations around a 13-year-old girl's first menstruation, which I have no right in talking about at all. As a 50-year-old man, I still have to talk about this film. Is anyone familiar with the Serge Gainsbourg record, Histoire de Melody Nelson? Anyone? If I can recommend one record today, it's Histoire de Melody Nelson by Serge Gainsbourg. It's the best record ever made. There's one problem with it, though. He wanted to do a record based on Lolita, and Kubrick beat him to it, so he rewrote Lolita, which is one of the most worst ill-informed ideas for a 45-year-old man of all time, but he did it, and it's a huge, amazing record. And again, I'm often asked to write about and talk about the making of the record, and I'm like, that record needs to stay in the last century because of the subject matter. So what I just did then was a caveat. I understand that I have no right talking about this, the theme in this record, but if you've seen the film, which Elena has, seen the film Valerie and a Week of Wonders, do you recommend this film? It's absolutely stunning piece of cinematography. The soundtrack, did people enjoy that soundtrack? Did people like the sound of that? It's like an Eastern European acid folk paean, which should go by the side of films like The Colour of Pomegranates, and, you know, there's nothing quite like it. And there is a costume designer who is pretty much responsible for a lot of the screenwriting as well, and she's called Esther Krumbakova, and she's a very, very interesting political figure in the Czech New Wave. She was always getting banned from making films, and there was her friend Vera Chytilova who made films like Daisies, and her husband Yaroslav Kuchera, who was an amazing cameraman whose processes were similar to the work of Len Lyon, Stan Brakhage, if you know who these guys are, experimental photographers and film developers. There's no film industry like the Czech New Wave. It's got the music, it's got the costume, it's got the shrouded politics, it's got the analogies, it's got everything, and it's also got beautiful little idents. And this film is a depiction, remake of the. Not a remake, an adaptation of The Little Mermaid. And that was an earring. This is the sound of a necklace. So every time you hear that, you know that's your equivalent of Michael Myers, sort of, or the Psycho thing, that's the earring. And this is something that I find beautiful in Czech soundtracks. There's also always these little idents. Now, this is by a guy called Zdeněk Liška. And Liška is hugely important because he was so respected in the film industry that people would re-edit entire films. You could change the polarity of a film. If you were making a film which was funded by the state and you were getting a bit lazy and it was a family drama and stuff like this and you were at a bit of a loss, he would change the polarity. He could turn a comedy into a thriller. He could turn a thriller into a romance just by using music to mold the film together. And he was an absolute genius, and everyone knew it. He would take bits of Dripping Water out of films and use them to make the score. He was really early in adopting electronic music in a synth-ridden society, and he was amazing. He should forever be next to people like Ennio Morricone, Francois de Roubaix, Bruno Nicolai, even people like Lalo Schifrin or John Barry. But we don't, because he was, pardon the phrase, trapped behind the Iron Curtain. If that means anything, that's what we won't know who he was. And he didn't have many records out at all. Most of Zdeněk Liška's records are on a label called Finders Keepers, which is something I'm really happy with. So anyway, let me play you some music by him. Bear with me. Oh, I hasten to add as well, the Eastern European stuff, pardon the phrase, but the Polish stuff and the Czech stuff that we did at Finders Keepers always followed something hugely successful. So when we did Sound of Wonder record, there was a track on there which was sampled by the Wu-Tang Clan. There's tracks on Thai records that we've done which have been sampled. There's a Swiss record that we did which got sampled by Jay-Z. So we'd have these weird bits of money that came flying in. Every time it was something we just thought we were going to go bankrupt, some rapper would sample us, and it was just like, yes, I knew. The 18-year-old me knew that we were doing something right here. So every time we had success, I'd go, right, let's follow it up with some Czech records or some Welsh records, and everyone would go, oh, Andy's gone mad. We were doing so well, but now he wants to. So the records that I'm playing you now, there's such a massive fraternity of our fans and followers early doors, which would just be like, where's the break beat? Where are the drums? Where's the fuzz guitar? Why are you releasing all this Eastern European romantic music? And I'd say, mind your own business. The necklace.
zvony znějí, už nevěstu přivážejí. Závoň jako z mořské pěny, protože se sám král žení. Král se pyšně směje, žalem vzdychá paní, takové to bylo smutné milování.
Gets a bit fairy tale after that bit. But did you like that? Yeah. Yep. There's, huh? Yeah. Well, soundtrack music does, right? You know, soundtrack is progressive rock, It's like, it changes all the time. It has to. It has a narrative, Oasis don't have narratives. They might do. I don't know. I'm no expert. Last night we were talking about Lischka. So I said to Eleanor, what would you love me to talk about tomorrow? And she said, talk about Lischka. And can you talk about this film, Ikari XB1? So I will do that now. But, sorry, I didn't bring the record. This is what I'm trying to say. So I said, oh, no, I forgot to bring it. But we can get it on the internet, I think. Help!
In the meantime, may I ask if you can show us the record sleeves from the first two Czech records that you played?
Yeah. So, one thing with Finders Keepers and Twisted Nerve, I did all the artwork. 90% of the artwork. With the Czech films, I didn't have to do the artwork because there's the biggest dream for me is taking Czech film posters and putting them on a record sleeve. It's just like, oh my God, this is the thing I've been looking for. So I didn't really, but these are they. So there's like an insane amount of sleeve notes in Finders Keepers records as well. And sometimes I didn't realise this, but we had to put a CD book. That CD booklet didn't fit in the CD case because it was too thick, so we had to use it inside the record instead. But, so there you are. You can pass these around, by the way. I mean, yeah. Okay, so it's a good story, this. So it was made in 1963, Zendet Lischka, Ikari XB1. It's a voyage to a mysterious green planet that they go to, but they cut it up for the Americans got hold of it and they chopped it up to totally change the meaning of the film, which was crazy. And I'd love to tell you more, but I think you should watch it because it's kind of like a great plot with a great twist. But it was 1963, and I've been told off for saying this, but it's like Aphex Twin from 1963, or like Square Pusher from 1963. And when you first hear it and realise it's from 1963, you're like, how can that be from 1963? But it is from 1963. When? Can't remember. What do you think of that?
Does this go on for 23 minutes?
No?
It's crazy.
Yeah. It's your favourite? This is what pop music sounds like in space. So, do you check Aphex Twin 1963? Any takers? Does anybody see where I'm coming from? Do you get it? Am I right? Kind of. When Zenda Lischka was asked to do this soundtrack, he asked for all the best players in the Barandov Orchestra, and he asked every single member to come in separately and do an audition. And when they came in, he asked them to play a scale. So every part of the ensemble came in and played a scale in front of him. And he was recording them. So they came in and they left and they didn't know whether they were going to get the job in the orchestra. And then he took the tapes and he cut them all to pieces and he duplicated them and he made huge tape loops and chopped them all together on rulers and loops and everything and used every member of the orchestra to make that soundtrack. Which is, I've got hairs on the back of my neck. Well, I've got hairs all over me, but the ones on the back of my neck are standing up right now. So, is that amazing? Yeah. Give him a round of applause. So I'm so glad that Eleanor talked about that last night because I would have forgot that story. And it's a prime example of why Zenda Lischka in the Czech New Wave is such an amazing composer who we should, hold in the same esteem as John Barry or Ennio Morricone. Okay. It wasn't only Bollywood that ripped off famous songs for soundtracks, and I'm so glad that they did. Because I don't really like playing ABBA or Michael Jackson when I DJ, but I like playing a Bollywood version of it, and I also like playing Brazilian versions of famous pop songs, so... With the success of Finders Keepers, I started getting asked to do compilations for other labels as well, which is interesting. And a Brazilian label in London called Far Out said, would you like to work with some Brazilian catalogue? And the catalogue was owned by a company called Som Livre. And the problem with compiling Brazilian music is people have loved Brazilian music for a long time. You know, Tropicalia has been so well documented, and so has, Musica Popular Brasilica and all these different streams of amazing psychedelic music to come out of Brazil. It's well documented. What's not documented is the soap opera music that came from the Brazilian scene. And there was an amazing wealth of novella soundtracks, TV soundtracks, which were places where people like Marcus Valley and Azimuth and all these bands hid to make unusual music. And not many people knew it. So I did a compilation for Far Out of Brazilian soap opera music, which was quite unlikely. Nobody had ever even looked in that area. So that was quite fun. But if you didn't notice, that was a version of Psych Rock by Pierre-Henri and Michel Colombier, which was the theme tune to Futurama. So I don't know if you could hear that in there, but it's bizarre to get. It's just this weird sort of way that you have to explain things like this came from Brazilian people loving instrumental music, the success of popcorn, the success of Jean-Jacques Perry and people like that in Brazil, and eventually it coming back, and I having to explain it as the Futurama music, because that's the most famous implication of it. So there you go. Jean-Claude Vannier. Now, he was the first artist that we ever put out on Finders Keepers, and it will remain one of my favourite records of all time. And I have to open it. And I don't know if, do people buy vinyl here? I don't know how you unseal your records, but the professional way is to use the side of your T-shirt, like that. That is what I'm doing, by the way. Yeah, I'm very, very passionate about music, but yeah. I think this record might end up in the library here. Is that, yeah? Do you want me to explain about the library? No, I don't need to do that. No. All right, then. I won't. So this was Serge Gainsbourg's best arranger, Jean-Claude Vannier. Histoire de Melody Nelson, like I mentioned earlier, is a massive record. It's a legendary record which has been sampled from everyone from the Beatnuts to Beck to David Holmes' Massive Attack. It's just been ripped off a zillion times. There was always a rumour of a sequel to that record, but the problem is not many of you knew what the record was in the first place, so it's hard for me to talk about the sequel. But and it came in a cover which was basically just a naked man on the beach. So it sort of hid incognito as a rare record in French record shops for many years, and it's like, you know, it's now £1,000 record, but the Finders Keepers reissue that we released over and over again was the first thing we ever did on Finders Keepers. He's remained a very good friend to this day. And while he was working with Serge Gainsbourg, he did soundtracks to films like The Shemins of Kathmandu, La Horse, Cannabis, mostly, again, heroin cash-ins. Cannabis is a film about heroin, which is funny. La Horse is a film about heroin. So, but they're these sort of 60s psychedelic films which are usually about heroin. And but this record is about a child who likes to kill flies, l'enfant assassin de mouche. I'm actually just realised that I'm wearing the T-shirt. So anyway, it sounds a bit like this. It isn't a soundtrack, but it's the first thing we released. I'll take it back a bit. Jean-Claude Vanier, L'Enfant Assassin de Mouche. That was the label. That was the record that started it all. A hugely conceptual record by a guy who did some utterly amazing French soundtracks. 16 years after we'd reissued that record, which was already 46 years old, Action Bronson's manager got in touch with us and asked to sample it. So I don't know if any Action Bronson fans are here, but that was... I can't remember the name. It's called Crocodillo something. But what's crazy is this record has kind of tortured my children their entire life. You know, and it's a deeply conceptual album which changes. I always say this record is a great first record for finders keepers because it's got about 1,000 records on the one record, so it just changes all the time. It's a hugely schizophrenic album, which which I absolutely love, and it samples strings off other records, and it's just it's crazy. But my kids, it kept them awake at night for years, negligibly paying the bills. But it's not the kind of thing you probably want to listen to at breakfast. But 15 or 16 years later, when I took my daughter to see Action Bronson in Manchester, and she heard that record drop, she recognised the sample, looked at me and said, "No way, it's that record that we used to have in our house when we were kids." And I was like, wow, done like full circle, and then we've done another circle round it. So it's like unbelievable. In French music, especially populated by people like Jean-Claude Vanier and Francois de Rebay, there is a fondness of a recipe which is thick, plucked bass with a plectrum, very close up, tight drums and clavinet. Do you know what a clavinet is? It's like a Rhodes piano, but it's got more bite. So if you know the track Superstition by Stevie Wonder, there's like a spidery... It's almost like a cymbalum or a harpsichord. It's actually an electric harpsichord, really, is what it is. But there was a dream soundtrack that never came out by Serge Gainsbourg and Jean-Claude Vanier, and it was one of our holy grails. Valerie in a Week of Wonder was a holy grail. The Devil by Andrei Korzynski was another holy grail. The soundtrack to The Moomins was a holy grail. The Holy Mountain was a holy grail. Belladonna of Sadness was a holy grail. And within the first 15 years of the company, we'd realised that we'd released a lot of holy grails. And I mean holy grails, things that we had to rescue from old suitcases and master tapes and knitting master tapes back together and cleaning things up and contacting people in multiple different languages and just really hugely driven by the passion to just liberate these presumably lost soundtracks. There's an interesting story with this. It's a film called The Shemins of Kathmandu, which is another heroine film about the road to Kathmandu, where Jane Birkin is a bit like the French Connection, but like on a hippie trail with a lot of crazy psychedelic music in. And it's set in the May '68 riots in Paris, and everyone runs away to go to like Nepal. So you can imagine how trashy or beautiful it might be. But anyway, the master tapes were lost forever. I'll explain why in a bit. But this is the recipe, you know. I'll play a record that didn't come out on Finders Keepers, just to sort of illustrate my love for and the signature sound of French soundtracks, and why I possibly think that the French, with Vanier and this guy Francois de Rebet within their arsenal, are probably leading the soundtrack game for me, even though I think people like Lischka are hugely innovative and unsung heroes as far as sort of successful composers go and well-known composers. Vanier and Francois de Rebet are hugely important to me. And I'm playing this because it's possibly my favourite soundtrack, and it's one that got away. We were trying to get the rights for this over and over, and they were there in our midst, and people weren't answering the calls, and there was reasons why. And then when these things don't happen, it hits you sideways. You know, you could be cooking food for your family, or or a bowling alley, or someone said, "Oh, have you heard that Daughters of Darkness soundtrack's coming out?" And I'm just like, "What? We've been chasing that for years. Why didn't they let us do it?" But you can't always get what you want. But this is a hugely beautiful piece of French music to a film called Daughters of Darkness, which was set in Ostend, and it's by Francois de Rebet. So it needs to be. I need to play my favourite soundtrack right now. That's cool, isn't it? How long have we got? Is anybody addicted to tobacco? Yeah? We've got 25 minutes. Are you happy for another 25 minutes? Sure? All right, well, we're going to move into... So that was from a horror film called Daughters of Darkness. Another misguided idea by some middle-aged guy to make a lesbian vampire film. But, it happens. But it's a beautiful film, I think. Horror soundtracks. Well, I've always been interested in horror films, and it's such a wealth of great music. And because of the subject matter, there's so many unreleased horror films. It's amazing how the sort of rare groove, sort of hauntology, hipster collector's market really got into horror soundtracks, and you'd start hearing horror soundtracks in clubs and DJs playing them, which was weird. And then there was a friend of mine, Spencer, set up a dedicated horror soundtrack label called Death Waltz. I don't know if you know this label. And it was a real turning of the tides. I couldn't believe it, because I remember buying horror soundtracks, and you always had to skip past the tension. There'd be the scary bit, the tension, and then there'd be the drums, like the funky bit, and then you go back to the tension again. I said, you can't do a whole album of just tension. But people seem to get into that. If you buy Italian horror films, you'll get tension, bossa, and then like murder. So it's amazing in Italian films. It made me realise that mock Italian bossa nova is always the precursor to bloody death. And now I'm more afraid of that kind of music than I was of the horror, because you know what's coming. And I think we were having this conversation last night, and it's very nuanced, but after the pandemic, we've all felt this insecurity about our careers. And if you're a DJ or such like for a living, or selling records, you know, it was difficult to adapt, because if people haven't been out on a Saturday night for 3 years, and then they get on the dance floor and you start playing horror soundtracks, it's going to be a different type of horror, right? People don't want to be educated at that point. So I had already sort of changed what I was playing, and now I play a lot more cumbia, I play a lot more early Greek music, I play a lot more tropical music. But that is because I've realised that cumbia, and if anyone familiar with the genre cumbia, it's actually inherently darker than any of the premeditated soundtrack music that we've got. And if you imagine the potential amount of cocaine that might be going around, or I always imagine, like, you know, while this band's playing this music, someone's polishing some machine guns, and we're all dancing. And I don't know if anybody's been to South America or DJ'd in Mexico and the such like, but that music represents something which is a precursor to something that might be quite scary. So, you know, I've found that inherent darkness within me is best celebrated now through happier music. So I don't know what I'm trying to say, but it exists. But horror soundtracks, whoever thought that was going to be a thing? Yeah, okay. So, well, we were doing them anyway, and we weren't a specialised horror label, but one of the main reasons I'm going to play you this is a soundtrack to a video nasty, a famous video nasty, which isn't remote. Are you familiar with the concept of video nasties? Okay, so when videos first came out, they were uncertified. There was no 18 or 15 or PG thing on them, so young kids could watch whatever they wanted. If you had a video in the house, which only rich people had, you could watch whatever you wanted. And they were called video nasties because young kids were watching slasher films, which was crazy. So they had to, so anyway. And the films that didn't get a certificate, the early ones, were the rarish ones, and people thought they were the nasty ones, but they weren't. Some of them were just shit. And one of these shit films is called Werewolves on Wheels, right? And basically, it takes the idiom of a biker movie in LA and a werewolf movie and puts them together. But the music, surprisingly, is like some bizarre Amandul acid folk sort of druidic thing. And one reason, the real reason I'm going to play you this is just so I can talk about, and if this was a design or a product design symposium, I'd be talking about packaging and design a lot more, and I would have brought a lot more limited edition records. But this record was made out of vegan werewolf fur. And so if you'd like to pass that round, and be careful you don't get turned into a werewolf, don't put your hand in its mouth. Have you all had a stroke of the sleeve? Do you like the packaging? I suppose if you go online, you'll be able to see some of the crazy packaging we've done at Finders Keepers. We were graphic design students, so, you know, it made perfect sense for us. That music was by a guy called Don Gear. And apparently, he's a second cousin of Richard Gere. So, that's crazy. I spent a lot of time with his widow. And I spend a lot of time with widows. I spend a hell of a lot of time with widows. You know, this is these records are the bonus. It's spending the time with the widows, which is the good bit. You know, if you go in the attic, look at pictures of family and kids, and you go in the attic and you find family photos and more records, and you know, everyone's like, oh, he was an artist as well. It's like, here's some of his drawings, and you're just like, wow, we've got a record sleeve now as well, and you know, and here's a picture of him with his grandkids when he was like 20. I'm like, wow, we've got all the amazing source material here to make the bigger picture. Because some reissue labels just don't care. They just want to go, they just look for the rarest record on Discogs and go, we'll reissue that, you know. And there's so much that you miss when you visit, like, you know, there's so many amazing stories that I wouldn't have time to tell you when I've been looking for master tapes and looking for old records or just any sort of artifacts or components to tell a bigger picture. I was in Belgium once, and I had managed to track down an old lady who was the rights holder for this huge wealth of experimental Belgian music. And she was called Madame Nori. And she lived in a house on her own. And she said she would accept, like, a cash sum for, like, you know, to buy this old catalogue. It wasn't a money spinner because this music was kind of unlistenable. It was like, you know, it was crazy electro acoustic music. But I went round there with the cash in my pocket, and we did the deal, and couldn't speak any Belgium. She couldn't speak any English, and she was on a Zimmer frame. She was mini. And we had a little drink of some liqueur. She showed us pictures of the grandchildren, and I handed over the cash, and she put the cash with the pictures of the grandchildren as if to say, the money's going to these kids, which is brilliant. And then I sort of said, like, oh, we spoke about the master tapes, and for some reason I could talk about, like, the master tapes, and she went downstairs in the cellar. So I went down to the cellar, and as I was walking down there was a whole cellar full of master tapes. And this is a little old lady, she can't hardly walk, she can't hear any music, and I ran down there, and I hit my head on a pipe, and I fell over and knocked myself out. And then I woke up, like, 5-10 minutes later, like, what the hell was that? And I'm like, am I bleeding or whatever? And it's just one of these crazy, spooky situations. Like, she couldn't save me. Do you know what I mean? But it's just like the pot at the end of the rainbow of gold is there, and it's just like, doof. And this kind of thing happens, you know. It's happened. I got electrocuted at a flea market in Turkey. I found all my favourite Turkish records. You know these dreams where, like, you know, I don't know if there's any record collectors here, but everything on your want list is in one place and it's £1 each. It's just like, yes! So I'm putting these records, I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I'm with a deck like this, and there's an angle poised lamp, a metal lamp above my head, and I made a connection. It was like being hit over the back of the head. And I was with Chris Menist, I don't know, Chris Geddes from the band Bell and Sebastian was with me. And I turned around to him and I said, did you see that? And he was like, what? And I was like, a lightning bolt. And he goes, there was no lightning bolt. And then blood started pouring down my cheeks, and I'd bit my tongue like that. But the pile of records was there like that. So everything comes with a little sort of like, there's always like for every silver lining there's a cloud, but then there's always the silver, you know, I don't know, but yeah. There's a couple of weird stories for you. So I spent a lot of time with Don Gear's widow talking about Richard Gere. And he didn't get paid for the soundtrack because they spent all the money on werewolf special effects. And they employed somebody who used to work for Disney as a special effects expert, which is why the werewolf at the end is one of the cutest werewolves you will ever see in your entire life. What happens when you can't afford to pay for a soundtrack, though? I mean, some of the films that we know and love have got amazing soundtracks. We were talking last night about films and not knowing who the composers are and not knowing where this music from and there not being any credit for the composers. And is anybody familiar with the concept of library music? No. Yeah? Good. Okay, good. So library music is basically in the 60s and 70s, even still now to some extent, you if you're a producer of films or a filmmaker or a producer of radio programs or TV programs, you sign up to a subscription pack where you get sent lots and lots of themed discs with music on. And you'll have a library then of this amazing music. And if you've made a horror film, but you can't afford to pay a composer, you go to the library and there might be a track called Strange Night or Crescendo City or Witches, right? Or Procession. And you'd go, oh, wow, I can probably use all this record on my next film. And there's a Jess Franco film called The Demons. And Jess Franco's made about 300 to 400 films. There's a portmanteau called Erotica, which is horror and erotica. And he made the film that I mentioned earlier, Vampiros Lesbos. I'm not going to recommend his films, but I will recommend the music in his films. And I will also celebrate his optimism and celebrate his over-ambition. It's negligible whether he even ever finished a film, but he did make a lot of great films. And when it came to putting the music on the films, he'd already left, so the editor had to do this. So when we released the soundtrack to The Demons, it came from a library record. Does everybody understand what library music is? Was that a successful explanation of what library records are? If you go to Musica Bizarre, yeah, there's got some library records in there, you know. There'll be tracks like Chasing a Fox, or It's a Cloudy Day, or Let's Go for a Walk. I've got a library record called I Don't Feel Well, which is one of my favourite titles for any record. This track is called Runway, and it's the main theme to the film The Demons, which is basically a rip-off of The Exorcist and Witchfinder General, and I'd give it if I was to score it out of 10, I'd give it a solid 2 out of 10. The idea with library music as well is that you take one track from one album, one track from the other album, and you make like a mixture because you have got some sort of creative self-respect. Every track, he just used every track off the same album for the soundtrack because he probably couldn't be bothered going in the other room. This is another example of library music. Bruton Music made library records in the UK using famous composers, possibly under different names. A lot of session musicians like Herbie Flowers or Dave Richmond or Brian Bennett, people that made pop records in the 60s, but as a sideline, they would go and get paid cash in hand. This piece of music, I'll play you the piece of music, then I'll tell you what it is. That record's called Cool Sweat, which is a negligible title in itself. Nobody comes out in a cool sweat, to my knowledge. That music, not many people know this, was used in a famous film. Is anybody a fan of American Werewolf in London? You know when they go in the porn cinema and there's a porn film on, John Landis had made his own mini porn film within the film American Werewolf in London. In every John Landis film, there's the phrase, "See you next Wednesday." If you watch a John Landis film, it's always in there. And the name of the porn film is called See You Next Wednesday. And that music, because he didn't want to get a composer, he just went to library music and found a little piece of music, and that sounded like a porno to him. So that's the music that's in there. So, and I don't think anyone knows that, but anyway. So one day, I might reissue that and put it in a second vegan werewolf skin sleeve, but on a 45, which would be nice. Through Jess Franco Films, we returned to the more expensive side of licensing, which is Italian film music, which will take us back to my early days when that pilot came to my door. This is nothing to do with me. Help. Do we need this on? That's me. Yeah, that was me. That was me with a dirty bucket. Right. So this is, again, Jess Franco, but this time, because it's an Italian co-production, he could use Bruno Nicolai. And Bruno Nicolai was Ennio Morricone's right-hand man. And everybody thinks Ennio Morricone, Nicolai, Alessandroni, they'd be very expensive composers which would only do very special films. But the thing is, they were absolute workaholics, and they worked through the night to make endless pieces of music. So for Morricone to do a slasher film, or for Bruno Nicolai to do a slasher film on behalf of Morricone in the same group, it's the same team, you know, back to the whole cul-de-sac, you know, the little 45. It's the same little crew of three guys, Alessandroni, Bruno Nicolai, and Morricone would facilitate the trash movie scene, and then later they would recycle the soundtracks for other films. So if you understand what I mean, in the economics of this low-budget film industry is a real hotbed for creative redistribution of music. This is... Jess Franco also made films about Dessard, which is, again, quite ill-advised. But, yeah, but this is a great piece of music by the very famous and wonderful Bruno Nicolai. Don't hear much music like that. Quite unique music. Good. You like it? That record was recycled many times after this. Do you want to hear another piece of music from an Italian thriller which was recycled? Yeah? That's the ground. Italian thriller.
How did it look with this soundtrack?
Yeah, who knew? Yeah, you know, who knows? I don't think, you know, I guess, like, if you wanted to license that to use it on a compilation or a film maybe 20 years ago, it'd be really, really cheap, you know. I should imagine if you wanted to license it now, it'd be really expensive. And I'm just assuming that you know the name of the program that it was reappropriated for was... There you go. Okay. All right, then. Let me take you back to... What is amazing for me is, after this point, we started like doing quite a lot of Italian soundtracks on Finders Keepers. Again, it's like Italian furniture or Italian, like, I don't know, wine or clothes or handbags or whatever. There's a premium. So sometimes it can be a little bit expensive. Sometimes it can... you know, every country has a different way of charging. When we licensed a load of Hungarian music, they charged by the second. So if you wanted to release a 7-minute prog track, it'd be twice as much as a 3.5-minute track, which is weird. I've never noticed that. If you license Czech soundtracks, they've got a really weird, stringent percentage where every different country has their own sort of rules and, you know, their own methods, and it's kind of weird. It never ends, never ceases to surprise you. But then if you buy music from a Pakistani construction company, you know, who knows? My Italian... So with the fact that we have released so many Italian soundtracks on Finders Keepers, does anybody know what this is? It's Belladonna of Sadness. Write it down. It's an amazing, utterly amazing piece of Japanese animation. Very, very unusual that it would come out on a soundtrack. But it weirdly came out on an Italian label. People used to say to me, has Belladonna of Sadness ever been released? I said, that never came out on a record. Weirdly, it came out on an Italian press. I don't know why that is. There's strange... The Italians' relationship with redistributing soundtracks is wonderful, you know, and it'll always surprise you. But we've released so many out of Manchester. I'm starting to think that Manchester might be the spiritual second home of Italian soundtrack music. And if you go back to that pilot that came to the door and brought me The Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue, the writing was already on the wall, really. It's quite poetic. I later did research on this, and basically there's a wonderful story, and we're maybe running out of time, but I'm going to tell it anyway. There was a guy in Manchester who, after the war, he was stationed in Italy, and he'd been in Italy for a long time before he returned home, and his name was Irving Wilson. And Irving Wilson had fallen in love with opera music, and he came back to the UK, and there was no opera music. So he got together the money that he had and decided that he was going to rectify that problem. And he licensed opera music, and in an old tyre factory in rural Derbyshire, he bought an old EMI pressing lathe, and he started manufacturing his own opera records. He had a huge love for opera music. And when he'd go on holiday every year, he'd go back to Italy, he'd take his kids, and his daughter became the babysitter for Ennio Morricone's kids. So he had this wonderful relationship with you know, Alessandroni and all these guys, you know. And as opera music, as his Mancunian pressings of opera music started to dry up and people got into pop music and beat and skiffle or whatever happened, he sort of diversified. And for this reason, he's probably the oldest independent record label in Manchester, if you started off with opera. If I was to do a talk about independent Manchester music, one of the oldest labels is Irving Wilson's label. Anyway, he opened a shop called Rare Records in Manchester to sell his opera and sell music from all over the world, and also sell pop music and soundtracks. And there was a huge amount of soundtracks in Manchester because of Irving Wilson. When I was growing up, you could find these soundtracks quite cheaply everywhere because nobody wanted them. And when I was talking about horror music earlier, do you know who owns horror? The right to have horror soundtracks. When I was 15, it was the metal dudes. The guys that bought Fangoria magazine and Special Effects, the Video Nasty guys, they were the only guys that were buying the horror soundtracks. And you were buying them really cheap. So I've got to give kudos to the heavy metal dudes who bought the horror soundtracks back then, because it's such a brilliant subculture. Anyway, he employed some staff to take care of the pop table, and his biggest customers were people like Johnny Marr from the Smiths would go in there in the 70s and 80s. And one guy worked there, his main guy on one of the tills, and it was Ian Curtis from Joy Division, was one of the guys that works at the shop, Rare Records, which is on John Dalton Street. John Dalton Street is a very weird, not very descript small street in Manchester, but one of the tracks on Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue is suspiciously called John Dalton Street. So why would a Spanish-Italian horror film have a track called John Dalton Street? Why should it be called Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue? This film goes out to the Derbyshire countryside, and some zombies take over a church. They spent like hundreds of pounds in the local butchers to find intestines and offals, like a guy gets a pickaxe through his eye. There's a hell of a lot of smacksploitation, a lot of heroin going down in the film. They were chased out of town because they left Coke cans and burger wrappers all over the local churchyard, and that is the history of the making of Living Dead in the Manchester Morgue. It was all filmed very close to my house, and it was all filmed within 1 mile away of Irving Wilson's 1950s pressing plant, which is kind of weird. So I have got good reason to say that I really think that Manchester is the next spiritual home of Italian soundtrack music. Did you understand what I just said? So I do think it's quite romantic. I've got like a little... My heart's very warm for that fact and that matter. Okay, then. We could go on forever. I'll maybe just throw a few. Do you want to hear a soundtrack about a short film about making cheese? Yep. Yeah, would you like to hear that?
And the one with the woman dressed as a cat? Or...
You want to hear that? Yeah. Cheese. I'm going to do Holy Mountain, yeah? All right, okay. If you made a film about cheese, what would you call it? This is called Homage de Fromage. All right. God rest Dollar Brand, God rest Don Cherry, God rest Bessie Berger, who passed away also last month. Holy Mountain was one of the biggest quests for me. I've been a lifelong fan of Don Cherry. When we... finally did the Holy Mountain, it was almost like we've done everything we possibly can on Finders Keepers. Finders Keepers is on pause at the moment. It might come back. My partner Doug runs a jungle label. I'm looking after my elderly dad at the moment and writing a book and various things. I recently produced some music for Travis Scott and various things like that. So, we're having a little bit of time off. But Holy Mountain was definitely a massive, massive holy grail and a massive achievement. I call it an achievement because it took me 15 years to do this record. And it was owned by a company called Abco, which is Alan Klein. At the end of the Holy... So has anybody seen the film Holy Mountain? Holy Mountain is an incredible film. It's a trip. You have to watch this film. It's unbelievable. I can't really recommend it anymore. It's just an amazing thing. I would ring Abco. Now, Abco is a guy called Alan Klein, who was the manager of the Rolling Stones and the Beatles in America, and he was a very, very tough businessman. And the rumours that John Lennon and Yoko Ono funded Holy Mountain would justify how extravagant this film is. Somebody had to pay for it because it is crazy. But at the end of the film, it says, records, soundtrack being released soon on Abco Records and Tapes. And Alessandro Jodorowsky, the director, wanted to do a quadruple album of the soundtrack with like whole fold-out things, possibly a vegan werewolf sleeve, who knows. But obviously, there was a tenuous relationship and the soundtrack never, ever came out. 30 years later, I'm constantly ringing Abco and they're teasing me saying, yeah, we have the master tapes, we could do something, we might not do something, blah, blah, blah. The money's got to be right, whatever. Anyway, every Monday morning when I was assuming what resembled a 9-to-5 job, I would ring Abco in America, contact Abco, probably in the afternoon because of the time difference, and speak to Jody Klein. Jody Klein, who I thought the wonderful woman at Abco would make my dreams come true. Jody Klein. The word decline is even in her name, right? You know, she said no, she said yes, she said no, but it never, ever, ever, ever happened. And then they were announcing that they were going to transfer some of the music to go on a DVD. At this point, I'd been mithering her for 10 years. So I got in touch and I said, listen, we really want to be part of this. She goes, oh, go on then, in the text message. And I'd been saying, listen, I really need to get in touch. Do I have to send a bunch of flowers every week to the beautiful women at Abco Records? Just being a Mancunian idiot. And eventually they just said, yeah. And they said, all right, we'll do it. We'll let you do it. But you just need to know, Jody is a man, not a woman. So I'd been referring to Jody in the female for 10 years. But, yeah, so Jody was, yeah. Yeah, so that's it. And I was trying to send him flowers and chocolates and everything, take him on dates and all sorts of stuff, but it was Jody Klein. And we did it. It was brilliant. And we were the first people to do it. Months after, an Italian company also got hold of the rights and they did it. And we were like, but that's what you'd expect from Alan Klein's company. But I interviewed everyone from being friends with Nana Cherry and Beshi Berger and everyone. And the sleeve notes are insane with lots of secrets. So it's a great thing. 3 years later, I get a phone call from a guy in America, a guy that works at Trenton Record Exchange, and he said, a box of records have come in from an old film producer, and there's an acetate in here, 4 pieces of an acetate called The Sacred Mountain, and it says D. Cherry. And I was like, whoa, what's that? I said, it can only be the original intended Holy Mountain record. So I literally, so it was my mum's birthday. I was out having dinner with my mum, and I got this phone call about this record. So I sit down, my mum down, and then I go outside. I'm on the phone for an hour, and I left my mum in the restaurant because I was just like, right, whatever money I've got in my PayPal account, I'll just send it you now. I just need this thing. And it was, and it was the acetate for the Holy Mountain. And I got it home, and I played it, and the first track was, this is exactly what it is, it's perfect. And then these tracks that I'd never heard in my entire life came on, and they were the same as the Holy Mountain music. And one of them had a little jump on it as well, and I think this record was used as the transport from the studio to the film editors. And maybe someone went, oh shit, this has got a jump on it, let's just not talk about it. So I've got a whole bunch of unreleased Holy Mountain music, and if you were all massive Holy Mountain fans like me, you'd go, oh my God, please play us that music, we need to hear it now. But maybe you're not. But anyway, so this is my biggest gift to you. I'm going to play you a totally unreleased piece of music by an amazing film that most of you have never even heard of. So there you are. That's my gift for you, ladies and gentlemen. But, this is a truly great thing. Oh, I hasten to add, there's a procedure where you can carve a record. You can make, if you want to make one copy of a record for yourself, people have lathes and they can make you one copy. So I instantly made myself like a little 45. That's what this is. I'm just explaining. All right, then. I'll play you this piece of music, and I'll say bye now, and thank you for listening to me. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. And this is totally unreleased music for the film Holy Mountain. So. Thank you very much. I was told to say any questions, but I just don't think there's any time for any questions, right? Yeah. Just gave me a positive no, then. Yeah.